If you homeschooled your kids during the pandemic, you were not alone. There was a massive explosion of homeschooling during that time. But with the pandemic in the rearview mirror for many, people thought that the boom would fizzle. And in many states like Colorado, that's what happened with the peak of the pandemic, and then people stopped homeschooling, sending their kids back. But it isn't really the trend everywhere. A new study from Johns Hopkins Institute for Education Policy Homeschool Research Lab found 90% of states that report homeschooling enrollment found increases for the 2023-24 academic year. In Louisiana, for example, we're seeing a steady increase in homeschooling before the pandemic. That continued after the pandemic. Also seeing that growth at a wide variety of levels, with growth ranging anywhere from 8% in Wyoming to nearly 70% in places like Rhode Island. Joining me now, professor at Johns Hopkins School of Education, Dr. Angela Watson, to talk about this trend that we're seeing. Thank you so much for being here. Do we know why certain states over others, or the reason that post-pandemic a lot of people still prefer homeschooling?
Right. That is the question, and we don't know the answer to that. We have been looking at it. What we do see here is that this is not a regional trend. This is something that's occurring all across the country. It's not a red state, blue state issue. We see it going on everywhere. So we're really looking to dig into what exactly is causing not only families to not to return to the traditional public schools, but we are now seeing in last year's estimates, we're seeing an increase in people leaving the traditional public schools for homeschooling.
And do we know the reason for the leaving? I mean, is it resources? Is it specific to the family? You know, my kid struggles in this area, you're not providing it. What are some of the lists of reasons that people choose home is better?
Right. The list depends on the family. And so what you say is correct. Some families, we see huge concentrations of students with special needs in homeschooling. So families with students who their needs may not be met in the traditional public setting, or for whatever reason, the home is a better place for them. They are choosing homeschooling. We see large concentrations also of gifted and talented students in homeschooling. Students' primary concern for parents is safety. This is what they report most often as their reason for homeschooling, and that can look like lots of different things, from physical safety to bullying to racism and various concerns of that nature.
As you do your research, what are some of the supports that homeschooling families now have that they maybe didn't have a decade or so ago, as we see more people turn to that option?
Right. So the old homeschooling community had to be really dedicated because there weren't a lot of supports for them. Now, though, we see all kinds of technologies and AI and curriculum companies marketing and tailoring things specifically for the homeschool community. So that's something that has been very different. We also see a huge influx of hybrid schools and co-ops, and micro-schooling now is becoming extremely popular. These look much more like traditional models where students go to school a few days a week with peers, and then they're homeschooled the rest of the time, either directed by the parent, or maybe they are working on assignments given to by their teachers. So homeschooling looks very different now, I think, than it did a couple decades ago.
And how are schools responding to this, Dr. Watson? Because the fewer students you have, the fewer funding that you end up getting, right? I mean, paying for pupils. What has been the school response to try to attract students and families back?
So in the past, public schools would not allow homeschool students to come to school for a curriculum, a certain course, or for sports. But there's really been a trend over the last decade, especially, and then since the pandemic, we've seen a lot of this expansion as well, of the traditional public school allowing homeschool students access to the public school for things like chemistry class or chess club, or to play sports. This varies by state. Some states allow lots of access, some states don't allow any access, and then everywhere in between. But it is a very clever way for the traditional public schools to entice some of these students back, even on a part-time basis, and then they do get a prorated part-time funding for that as well.
Yeah, kind of the best of both worlds. Interesting data. Dr. Angela Watson, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.